I'm Chris,
And I'm Kiley. And this is Redefining Resilience,
where we explore what it means to build a resilient lifestyle
so you can thrive in any and every situation. Welcome back.
What's that song? Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. What is that off of?
You might have made it up.
No, that's a song. That's a real song.
Okay, well, while you figure that out, I'm going to introduce our next topic of conversation.
What is the topic of conversation?
Conflict. Yeah, I think this is a timely topic. Not that we've had much conflict going on in our country over the last, I don't know, 8 years.
Long while?
Yeah. I think it's a good topic to discuss. And this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about and to learn about because I think it's so useful.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that we encounter everywhere, personally, professionally, socially. I mean, we are going to deal with conflict our entire lives. And it's not even necessarily just with other people. Conflict can be internal too.
I think we deal with more internal conflict than we do external conflict.
I would agree. And oddly enough, in my grad school program, I took a class on, I think it was conflict resolution systems.
Systems?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. It's actually the only class I truly remember from grad school.
Yeah.
Not that I wasn't like paying attention. It just like, this was the most meaningful class I took in the 2-year program because I thought it was so applicable. And we each had to create a model for conflict. And I chose to create a model on internal conflict.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so internal conflict, I think, is a really interesting topic. And we might even be able to go into a conversation on that alone. But today we're just going to talk about conflict more broadly. And I guess the first thing we should do is define what conflict is.
Yeah.
So what is it?
Conflict is a disagreement or argument between people, groups, or even with a person. That's a little weird. Or even with a person. A person is a part of people or groups.
Right. Or maybe it's oneself.
All right. Oh, within a person.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, maybe I should learn how to read. That's the internal conflict.
Your brain is conflicted.
It is. It is conflicted.
Okay, easy. I think people have a different feeling about conflict. Some people are not afraid of it, and then other people are terribly afraid of conflict. What are some common misperceptions about conflict in your mind?
That it's all bad.
Yeah.
I think standing your ground is one of the most beneficial things you can do for yourself. Yeah, I think taking like recess out of school doesn't allow children to get in any kind of conflict. Like just teaching your friends how to play a game that you made up on the spot creates conflict. Mm-hmm. And I used to do that shit all the time. I would just make up a game. Like, these are the rules. And I would just make the rules up as you go. Yeah. And anybody with kids that has ever played a board game with a child understands conflict is like with every roll of the dice. So it's a good thing.
It's like in Big Daddy.
Yeah.
We're going to play I win. How do you play? I win.
Yeah. Great game. Ripe with conflict other than for that child.
Yeah. And I think another misperception is that just because conflict exists, it means you're not getting along. Or that there's something wrong with the relationship. No, it's a natural part of any relationship or an interaction. Disagreements don't necessarily mean something is wrong. I think it's healthy, in fact, to have different opinions, different beliefs, different values. That's normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we handle it that determines whether or not the relationship is going to get stronger or weaker as a result.
And the definition doesn't say a dismemberment of the relationship or a downfall or an explosion or anything bad. It's just a disagreement or argument.
Yeah.
Like conflict is just two things that don't align. And that's fine.
Yeah. And I think, there's probably some folks out there who are more conflict averse who would say avoiding conflict is the best solution. And I would also say that that's not the case. Avoiding the conflicts can actually make things a lot worse because you're now bottling up feelings. And at some point, it's like if you shake a Coke bottle and you eventually the top's going to pop off and it's going to explode and potentially be even worse than if you had just had a conversation right then and there instead of shoving it down.
Yeah. There's no way to handle all the stimulus that life throws at you without conflict.
Yeah.
There's going to be something that you're like, man, I don't agree with that.
I mean, just the other day, I think I was like going off on a tangent because I felt like all my goals were in conflict.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that was more of an internal conflict than anything else.
But what happened after the end of that? You're like, well, this just felt really good because I got to vent.
Yeah.
You get all that shit out there.
I got it out. And I
Because the
felt better.
voice in your head sounds different than the voice that comes out of your mouth.
Totally.
So if you sit there and just ruminate over it in your head and stew on it, it sounds crazy because you're only hearing one version of it, which is
I think it actually sounds normal. And then when you say it out loud, that's when you realize you sound crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's like, man, that guy in my head sounds insane.
Well, yeah. As soon as I said all this stuff out loud, I was like, okay, I'm completely overreacting now at this point. And I recognize that.
Yeah. But you can't do it until you hear it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with conflict resolution in today's day and age is social media. Social media is just living in your brain. You type out the thing you don't say out loud. You're just literally repeating what's in your noggin to a bunch of people that's repeating what's in their noggin. That's probably not being vetted through much other than emotions. And then you just have this wicked back and forth that doesn't solve anything and creates this huge problem. And then creates people's view of conflict being the worst thing ever. And we get this, somehow virtue gets tied into it. It's like, well, I'm virtuous because I don't argue or because I'm standing for this. It's like, relax, bud. You're just so far off from reality. You're just living in your brain. Because I think most people, well, I'm going to venture to say 100% of people, you get them in a room and have a casual conversation about it, you're probably going to align on most things, about 80%.
Or you're at least going to have the delivery in a way that is not mean or aggressive like it is on social media. I think we have a lot of keyboard warriors out there that think that because they have a platform that they can say whatever they want and there's no repercussions. But what I default to when there is any kind of like very dramatically different opinion than mine on social media, I have offered to have an actual live conversation with the person. If I have a differing opinion and I think it could be a productive interaction to where like maybe I'll gain some new understanding or they might gain some new understanding, I offer to have a coffee conversation with people. I mean, no one's taken me up on it yet, so I don't know if it's not a very enticing offer or what, but I'm not afraid to have tough conversations, and I think we all need to be more comfortable with it because there's only one way that conflict is productive, and it's if we set aside our desire to win the argument or win the battle, and we go for a win-win outcome. Because if somebody wins the argument, that means there's a loser.
Well, not even win-win. If you just go in and say, listen, man, there's things I don't understand. Mm-hmm. Like I had a issue with a client's doctor, what was prescribed to her. So I did some background work and quite a bit of homework, and I emailed the doctor and I said, I would love to have a conversation with you over coffee. Your place or mine, you pick. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I view as wrong on pretty much every level. What don't I see?
Yeah.
Was part of the question or the email. What am I not looking at that makes this a viable, useful
protocol?
Yeah, protocol. Why is this useful and why is this okay? I don't see it. I've 20 years in this field. I don't understand it. Yeah. So teach me something. And if I can leave that conversation with more knowledge, then I've created a great partner in this battle. But if I walk away with more knowledge that solidifies my opinion or my viewpoint, then I'm smarter either way.
Yeah.
But there's no anger involved. There's no frustration. Yeah. It's just learn.
Well, and I think another misperception that exists with conflict is that it's about what people say. But really, a lot of people have a hard time saying what they actually mean. So the conflict could be about something that is completely different from what's being said. I'll have clients tell me that they're overwhelmed, and then they'll give me like a bunch of different reasons why they're overwhelmed. But at the core of it, it could be that their spouse needed them for something last minute and it completely derailed their day. And it's not that they're overwhelmed with all these work priorities. It's just that they couldn't tend to them because they were needed elsewhere. And it was just the change of the situation or the unplanned pivot that really was at the root of the conflict. It had nothing to do with the fact that work is hard or overwhelming. Yeah. Right. But that was what initially was shared in the conversation. And I hear it all the time. This is a very common one that I hear. It's not really about, the thing that you think it is. It could be because you're not sleeping. It could be because you have a newborn or a baby, because newborns aren't teething, but maybe your baby is teething and not sleeping, and that's really at the root of it.
Newborns are pretty terrible. Teething's just icing on the cake because it means it lasts a little longer.
Yeah. But a newborn isn't teething yet, so
no.
Had to correct that.
Yeah.
Fact check. I think another misperception is that every conflict has to have a resolution or needs to have some sort of compromise or agreement.
Yeah, I think that the compromise is the most frustrating part because we've turned compromise into I win a little bit more than you or you lose a little bit more than me. And that's just not how this works. Yeah. I've left multiple conversations with, we're just going to agree to disagree on this one. Mm-hmm. Like, I think my viewpoint's right. You think your viewpoint's right. You have plenty of data to back up yours, and I have plenty of data to back up mine. I used to spend a lot of time with a doctor friend of mine in the town I used to live in, and he would totally disagree with me. So we would run tests. He would run it, I would run it, and we would run different protocol. And at the end of it, we would come back together, and we would find out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah,
which was really cool. And it changed his viewpoint on a lot of things, and it changed my viewpoint on a lot of things. I used to firmly believe in stuff. Like, I will die on this fucking hill.
I know.
And after we vetted it together from completely opposite viewpoints, I was different.
Yeah.
I wasn't all the way onto that side, but I was about halfway there.
Yeah.
Which dramatically changed how I operated.
Well, and I think that's the most helpful outcome is when you learn something along the way. Some disagreements may end in, hey, let's agree to disagree, and just walk away with a better understanding of where the other person's coming from. I mean, right now, I think with everything that's going on with politics, it is very easy to think that your opinion is the only correct opinion. And the thing that we're not factoring in is all of the history and experience and the values that have been instilled in each one of us over time. Me and my sister have differing political views, but we grew up in the same household, same values, same, family history. My mom and I have different political views. For same reason. We both, like, obviously she gave me a lot of the values, but I've interpreted them differently with my own experience and through my own lens. So you have to understand that people have different experiences. I met a gal whose family are European immigrants and came to America legally. And so she has a really strong opinion on immigrants coming to America. She feels very, very strongly that they should do so in a legal way. And so it was really bothersome to her that a lot of illegal immigrants were being dumped into America, but without taking the proper protocols. And you know what? Like, her perspective is 100% valid because she has firsthand experience with this.
So I think one of the hardest things when we get into conflict is we are clogged by our own emotion. And I think clogged is a good word because when I think of the word clogged, I think of hair in a sink.
And it's
It's
not
disgusting. It's in the way. It's old. It needs to be flushed. Like, get it out of there.
Yeah.
Your emotions clog your ability to view anything.
Yeah.
You know, when the new information's coming in where you're like, well, that doesn't fit. And I hate things that don't fit. And it might call you out a little bit, make you feel a little bit uncomfortable because you have to reframe the rest of your life around it. New information reframes everything. Mm-hmm. So I think that first and foremost, feelings aren't facts.
Right.
So if I could put that on a shirt, I would.
You can.
Turns out I can, and I will.
Holler at us if you would like a pre-order.
Right? And feelings aren't facts. So if feelings aren't facts, then they have no basis in our decision-making process. They do because we are human emotions, or we are humans and we're full of emotions. But like, we need to understand that facts are real. And we need to bend our emotions around facts.
Well, and I think this is a tough one because you have to also consider who's feeding you the facts.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where there's a lot of false information out there. Not to sound cliche, but there's a lot of fake news. And especially with AI generating images now, you know, you really have to be discerning about what you see, what you hear, what you read, what you consume, and ask yourself, does this fit into the reality that I know? I mean, we have to leverage a lot of reality testing right now to figure out what's fact and what has been contrived by the media.
I think the good rule of thumb is the 4-question filter. So when I asked ChatGPT the other day, the difference between red meat and is red meat good for your diet, basically is what I asked. And the answer immediately was no. Animal fat in red meat has caused X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's question 1. Question 2 was, what kind of animal fat are you talking about? Got a different answer. Question 3 was, can you define the difference between animal fat and processed meat? Third question gives me a completely different answer. Fourth question is, do we differentiate between red meat from animals and processed meat when we discuss red meat being poisonous? The answer is no. So without the 4-question filter, you just don't have enough data right on the surface. Because right on the surface, without asking what they mean by saying what they say, you get an answer. So I think the 4-question filter is the best thing to use for anything. So I tell my kids all the time, ask why. Ask why 4 times.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the 4th, if you've pissed them off, you've probably either found somebody that doesn't understand what they're talking about enough, or you've tapped a nerve. Mm-hmm. And generally it's because they don't understand what they're talking about enough, you know? And it gives you plenty of opportunity to then take it to the next question. Find out what the hell's going on.
Yeah. So different types of conflict that exist. There's internal and external conflict. Internal is really more of psychological conflict. This could be a struggle with your own thoughts, emotions, values, decisions that you have to make. It could be choosing between 2 things that you really want, some sort of mental dilemma, or, you know, changing who you are as a person. You realize, like, I think when I stopped drinking, it was more of an internal conflict than anything else before I made the decision, because it was like this future version of me that wanted to be better was in conflict with this current version of me that was not doing the best.
Yeah. I think internal conflict's the hardest.
I really do too. I mean, I had my little mentee bee last week about my goals, because it felt like, I wanted to do this self-care stuff, but that costs money. And then I have financial goals, which are to save and to not spend money. And then, all the food is the discipline I have around my food right now, eating the same foods over and over, is in conflict with my desire for variety and the desire I have to eat really nutritious, different foods. So yeah, there was a lot of internal conflict going on in my head last week, and I think it's normal. I think it is very normal, because as you change and grow and take in new information, you're at odds with the information that currently exists in your head.
I think internal conflict's the best, because internal conflict is fighting with the only person that matters anyways, because it's the only person that's going to make the decision. It's the only person that's going to psych you up that actually matters. It's the difference between motivating somebody, being externally motivated, and internally motivated. External motivation is a good YouTube video that gets you psyched up, meaning somebody can call you and immediately rock you, remove all the motivation. Mm-hmm. Internal motivation means it doesn't matter what time it is, what day it is, what's going on, who calls, what video you watch, you got to get it done and you do it. Mm-hmm. And without going through the conflict with yourself, you can't build internal motivation that's going to do anything. You're requiring external motivation all the time. Yeah. So I think internal conflict is fantastic. You're internally vetting with the only person that matters. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times it's what motivates you to do things differently.
It's the only one that matters.
You're weighing out pros and cons. And I mean, I had to go through that in order to come to the conclusion that alcohol was not getting me any closer to my goals.
Yeah.
And I mean, as you could tell, being in conflict with my goals is a common theme here for me.
Well, it means you're alive and your goals are big enough that it causes conflict.
Exactly.
If your goals aren't big enough that it causes conflict, those aren't goals. Those are just like slight speed bumps.
Yeah.
Those don't fucking matter.
Yeah.
They're too close.
Yeah. External conflict is conflict that involves an outside force. It could be another person, a group, society, physical obstacle. You have conflict over a project at work, or a legal dispute, or, if you're conflicted about climate change. These are all examples of external conflict. Most common type of conflict is interpersonal conflict, which is between two individuals. Mm-hmm. And it's typically based on differing views, expectations, communication styles, or emotional reactions to something. I listened to this podcast that very concisely said most of our conflict is based on different values. And it's not that you directly disagree with how somebody else is thinking, but we could take a controversial issue like abortion. Mm-hmm. And somebody may say, well, it's a woman's right to choose. Okay, so the value that is being expressed with that stance is freedom, right? Mm-hmm. I should have the freedom to choose. And then the other perspective could be pro-life, right? And we should be valuing the life of an unborn child. So right there, it's the value of freedom versus the value of life. We're never going to come to an agreement because everybody is going to value those two things at a different level.
Well, we have different filters, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem, is you just assume that everybody has the same filter. That's gotten me in trouble a lot. Like,
yeah,
I've met people that came from the same area as me, the same demographic, essentially 2 6-foot white guys sitting in a room, like Midwest white guys. I just assumed we were going to be on the same page, and I was wrong, like very wrong. And to the point that I came off unhinged is what it felt like. Like, whoa, man, slow that one down. Like I made a joke, and the joke was wrong. Like way past anything this guy would have ever said, and he was very sensitive about a lot of things. So I had to revert, like backpedal hard, not to apologize because I wasn't sorry, but like to make sure I've made sure he was comfortable.
Yeah.
The whole point wasn't to like barf my opinions all over him. It was a silly statement that I just assumed would have gone over well. But the misconception that filters exist in the same for everybody just because you might be the same in some aspects is just wrong. Yeah. And it's a silly way to ruin a relationship.
Well, and I think one thing you have to think about is there's two different types of outcomes that we can create with conflict: constructive or destructive. Constructive conflict is where we change, we grow, we have positive learning, right, from the experience, where we have either improved the relationship, we've got better communication, we've solved a problem. You know, if you're at work and you guys are stuck on how to tackle this project, or what the route is, the plan that needs to happen to get to the result you want, conflict could be the way in which you tease out different options and ideas and leads to collaboration, right? Where we can come to a solution together. We may not agree every step of the way, you know, like I think when I had a work trip and you're like, hey, I converted one of the rooms, or hey, I think you sent me a message on Slack and you're like, hey, I'm gonna switch up one of the rooms. And my first reaction was, no, don't change anything. I'm not there to help or help you think through it. And I got back and it was already done. And I was like, oh, guess this is taken care of. But in my mind, I was like, hey, that's not how I would have done it. But at the end of the day, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, that room wasn't making us money. And now the way you've got it configured, it actually is a revenue producing room for us in this office now. So at the end of the day, I understood why you did what you did. How we got there might have been a little bit different in approach. But at the end of the day, like, I also understand why you did it, because you're an ask for forgiveness, not permission kind of guy, and I'm an ask for forgiveness, not permission kind of gal, and I probably would have done the same thing.
So I used to work in banking, and I had this assistant manager named Audrey, and I first off, I had no fucking idea what I was doing. Like, when I got this job, I applied for it, and they said, what's your history in banking? I told this motherfucker I had a debit card. That was the answer to my interview question. Well, I have a debit card. I mean,
I've gone to a bank.
Yeah, right. I think I have one. You know,
I came here for this interview.
Yeah, I mean, but so I didn't have any idea what I was doing, so I would whiteboard everything. I had one of those giant sticky note pads, and I would put them on the wall, and I would just whiteboard all my ideas. And I would once a week meet with Audrey, and I would call her my bubble popper. I'm like, here's my ideas, fix them. You know, tell me what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, where we can go, whether or not this is even useful. And I would have like 50 ideas in a week, and I think we'd use one.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Sometimes she would pull the whole sheet off the wall and wad it up.
Oh, yeah.
She's like, do not go down that road. But without having that kind of conflict and being okay with that conflict, because some of those ideas I went down a rabbit hole on.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I wanted them. I thought they were cool. They would have made us a ton of revenue. At least I thought.
Yeah.
Turns out some of them we weren't even allowed to do. We could not do that.
Yeah.
But without somebody being open to conflict, her and I, we would have never had those conversations.
Yeah.
And Audrey and I existed on completely different planets. Like morally, socially, politically, We were very opposite, but we were really good friends. She is a phenomenal person. And without her and being open to her different viewpoint, I would have screwed myself.
Yeah.
I would have made some very bad decisions.
Yeah. On the flip side, destructive conflict.
That would be basically coming in and saying all these ideas suck and leaving.
Yeah.
There'd have been no vet, no help, no working through it, no understanding of what's going on, not trying to help me understand the reality of the situation. Or you coming in and saying, this is fucking stupid. Why'd you move the room? Put it back. You know?
Well, I had previous boss, I would take an idea to him, and it's almost exactly what you described. An idea is not like a fully baked plan.
That's why it's called an idea, not a plan.
Right. And so, I mean, I'm an idea generator, and I get it. Like, the person constantly coming to you with ideas is probably going to, at some point, get annoying. I would go to him with an idea, and he would always shoot it down. He would always say, like, I was making things more difficult for him, or why can't I just stick to the job I've been tasked with, or whatever, right? Stay inside the box. At the end of the day, he would always come around and come to me back with the idea, but it would be his. And I didn't care as long as the idea got used, right? So the idea isn't, it doesn't matter who came up with it or how we got there, but I knew it would make us better, and I knew it would help us grow the business. And I think the way in which he just constantly shot it down and had negative things to say was really difficult, because it made me not want to go to him with ideas because of what you just described. It just was constantly a shutdown.
Well, what does that do, though? That removes all communication in the office. That removes all growth in the office. Yep. That definitely stifles trust. Mm-hmm. If I can't trust you enough to say, hey, listen, I firmly believe in this opportunity. I firmly believe that this office needs to be moved. I firmly believe that this needs to be done. Well, you're probably one with the wrong partner, business or personally or professionally. And two, you're in the wrong spot. Yep. Like you need to find people that agree with you and that understand your vision. You haven't communicated your vision clearly, I don't think.
Well, and what it came down to was I was just more comfortable with change and growth and innovation than he was. And he didn't want to do the things necessary to actually evolve the business. And, you know, as a result, he hasn't grown in the, 14 years he's been in business now, and he stayed the same size. I mean, immediately when I started my business, I was growing. So it really came down to, are you willing to do innovative different things in order to move the needle? And what I realized was we're just not aligned from a values perspective on that, which is okay. It was just another clue that I was in the wrong place. So if you find yourself engaging in more destructive conflict, it could be that you're just in the wrong environment. You're just not around the right people. Destructive conflict almost always results in a negative outcome. It can escalate tensions between the two of you. It can be damaging to the relationship. It can lead to mistrust, like you said. And ultimately, you're not going to have a long-term relationship work out if it's constantly engaging in destructive conflict. It's not a long-term partnership that's going to work out.
Well, it can't. You can only be beaten down so many times before you're like, well, why do I even have an opinion and I'm not worth anything, you know? So how would you instruct people on learning how to deal with conflict? If you had somebody come in and say, I'm completely conflict averse, I would rather take one to the chin every time and then stand up for myself because it's awkward.
I mean, the first thing is communication. You have to be able to have a conversation. And in that conversation, you can't be talking to get your point across. You have to be listening for understanding. We both have to go into a conversation with the desire to understand where the other person is coming from. And if you go into the conversation that way, you're going to be far more open-minded. You're going to be more receptive to what they're saying, and you're going to come across far more empathetic. If you come off as an asshole, no one's going to listen to you. Your point is not going to be heard.
No, because your guard goes up and then you're defending yourself. I've had excellent conversations with people that are, I mean, literally, if you put us in a room together, people are like, well, they're going to go to war. And we have great conversations because the two of us were open to just find out what was going on. You know, I don't hate you. You don't hate me. What's up, dude? You know, let's vet this out.
Yeah.
Some of my best friends are completely opposite of the way I function, but they're great friends.
Well, and I think the other thing is you have to have the desire to find common ground. That was one of the big takeaways from my conflict resolution systems class, was the desire to find something that you both can agree on, because then it sets the tone for the conversation that, hey, we're not just trying to go to war with each other. We're trying to find something that we can both agree on.
I think one of the best questions to ask when you're starting the conversation with somebody, one to yourself and possibly out loud, is this relationship something we want to continue?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that definitely is going to impact how you approach the conversation. Because there's been conversations before where I went into it fully knowing I'm probably not going to speak to this individual ever again.
Those are conversations that are easier for me to have, though.
Well, yeah,
because my emotions are gone.
And you can say whatever you want without caring about the consequence.
Well, you can be more honest.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
because
unfiltered probably is the word I would use.
Yeah. I mean, you could be rude if you wanted to, but
yeah.
Like the whole understanding that feelings aren't facts is hard to implement whenever you're emotionally involved in something. So I would ask myself when I would get in frustrating conversations. One was with a boss right after I moved to Indy. I would have countless frustrating conversations. I was trying to sell credit cards to people that had $11 in their bank account. Like, they don't need credit cards. Like, that's financial suicide. But I would get pulled aside and like chastised for not at least offering it. And we'd have these lengthy conversations and I would get pretty emotional, like frustrated. And then eventually I'm like, do I even want to work here?
Yeah.
Why am I even here? I hate this job. So then all of a sudden my emotions were gone. And when we had the next conversation, I said, man, I really hate this job. I think this is wrong. And I worked my way out. I said, you know, this essentially, here's my 2-week notice. Because I had no emotions anymore, it was easy to make a logical, functional decision that was helpful for him because he needed somebody in that place to do the job that I wasn't doing, and I needed something else.
Yeah.
So it was helpful for both of us.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that asking yourself what an ideal outcome is going to be.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Because there have been times, so a previous employer and we left on not great terms. And at that time, I knew going into those conversations that I was not going to remain a part of that company. So at the end of the day, an ideal outcome was going to be me leaving.
Yeah.
And I knew I was not trying to go into those conversations to find some sort of like resolution so I could stay. That just was off the table for me mentally. And I knew the ideal outcome was to exit as peacefully as possible. And so everything I did in that conversation was to come to a peaceful transition.
Which allows you to have intention with your action.
Yeah.
Like that's
absolutely.
the whole point. Because then you're actually, you're not just treading water anymore, you're headed in a direction. I feel like conflict without any kind of concept of where you're headed is like swimming in the middle of a lake and just treading water.
Yeah.
Eventually you're going to drown.
Yeah.
If you have an idea of where you're going with it, what kind of outcome you want, you're at minimum headed to shore. Yeah. You're still in the fucking lake. You're still swimming, but at least you're headed somewhere.
Well, and I also think it's really helpful to talk about the worst case scenario. So like, you know, I have clients who have had client issues, right? So my clients' clients are upset with them. I always think, like, what's the worst case scenario? This client leaves you?
Yeah.
What is the actual impact of that? You know, financially, emotionally, once you get your head around the worst case scenario, like let's say you have to give feedback to an employee. Worst case scenario is they quit. Well, is this person producing at a high level? Is this person a positive impact on the team around them? A lot of times the people that cause the most problems for you are the people that need to go. But we're afraid of turnover. We're afraid of ruffling feathers. We're afraid of change. So sometimes when you ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario and why is that the worst case scenario? You actually come to realize that the worst case scenario isn't that bad after all. And you can probably find opportunity in the worst case scenario. So if that client leaves you, you know, I talk to my clients about it every day. When you have over 100 clients, one client leaving you at the end of the day is really not that big of a deal.
So this is why this 6 domains of resilience is super important and in the order that it's created, because the only way to do this is to understand the vision of what you're doing, why you're doing it, because that gives you an easy yes and no.
Yeah.
If you understand where you're headed, where your goals are, and the people that are with you on this trip, this journey, if all of a sudden they're not aligned with the vision anymore, what an easy, simple conversation to have. Hey man, we're headed in this direction. It looks like you're not. Like, not that that's bad, but this is where we're headed. So this is where I need you to be. And if you're not, awesome. We need to help you find a place that you are helping them towards their vision or your vision. So the conflict is actually extremely beneficial, and it's going to be a part of what you deal with. So you can take this information in and say, well, I'm never going to have that problem, and lie to yourself. Or you can say, okay, cool. Conflict resolution is something that's super important because I have to head towards my vision. And because it's my vision, not everybody else's, there will be conflict. There will be. So, yeah, I think it's really cool. I love how it all ties together. It makes me really happy. So,
well, I think if there's one key takeaway from today's conversation is don't be afraid to have the tough conversations. Do so with empathy and understanding and the desire to gain more perspective on how the other person is approaching the situation and where their values stand. At the end of the day, I can get on board with anybody who has an opinion, can articulate it in a thoughtful way, and has rationale behind it.
yeah.
Right? Like I have no issues with people who disagree with me if they can explain to me why, because then I can have understanding. Then I can have empathy. I can't have any empathy or understanding if you don't communicate with me. So by not having the conversations, you're actually doing more harm than good.
Yeah, and I think part of our whole concept here is to be a disruptor. I love that because it spurs on the conversations of conflict that need to happen.
Yeah.
The reason why we're in a lot of the positions we're in as a culture right now is because we avoid the conversation. We don't have it. All we have is angry statements and no conversation. Statements don't solve problems. Like John Mayer said, nobody's ever changed their opinion by the paint on a sign. Nobody. All that does is make you dig your heels in the sand and say, no, my opinion's more important. But if you have a conversation with somebody 90% of the time, I think that's a low percentage. 90% of the time, if you have an actual unemotionally fueled conversation, you'll land somewhere in the middle, both ends. A lot of the time.
Yep.
Man, good old John Mayer speaking the truth. Song's called Belief, by the way.
Oh, ooh, that's probably a good one to listen to.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
It's one of his best.
All right. Well, everybody go listen to John Mayer now and think about your conflict.
Your internal conflict.
Yeah, your internal. I know I will be.
Thanks for listening to Redefining Resilience.
To learn more about building your mental and physical readiness, check out odysseyresilience.org.
And follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok.